More than half a century ago, the skies of war revealed an uncomfortable truth. The machine designed to dominate the air had a weakness so fragile that a single hit was enough to turn it into a spinning tomb. During the Vietnam War, dozens of helicopters fell not because of the engine, not because of the main blades, but because of a thin, vulnerable, and seemingly secondary part, the tail. While the United States perfected helicopters that were larger and faster, a group of engineers in the Soviet Union began asking a dangerous question. What if the real problem with the modern helicopter was never the engine, but the entire design itself? What they discovered challenged decades of aerospace engineering. They removed one of the helicopter's most iconic components, a decision that sounded insane. No tail rotor, no traditional system, no structure the entire world considered essential for flight. But then something unexpected happened. The new machine didn't just fly. It lifted heavier loads, spun with impossible aggression, and moved between buildings, mountains, and ships as if it were defying the laws of physics. It was compact, brutally efficient, and so maneuverable that some pilots compared it to a predator hunting in the sky. However, behind that revolution hid a terrifying secret. At extreme speeds, the enormous blades could move so close together that a tiny calculation error was enough to trigger an instant collision in midair. Two giant rotors smashing into each other at hundreds of kilometers per hour. A mechanical disaster impossible to survive. And so the question emerged that would change the history of military aviation. Why did Russia bet on such a dangerous design? And how did it transform it into one of the most feared aerial technologies on Earth? Today you will discover the secret engineering behind Russian coaxial helicopters. A story of war, extreme physics, innovation, and absolute risk. Because sometimes, to create a superior machine, you first have to break every rule. For decades, the conventional helicopter dominated the skies with a design that seemed perfect. A massive main rotor spinning above the cockpit generated the lift needed to raise tons of metal into the air. It was simple, powerful, and effective. But it hit a problem born directly from one of the fundamental laws of physics. When the main rotor spins in one direction, the helicopter's body tries to rotate in the opposite direction. This is the effect of torque. If nothing counteracted that force, the entire cabin would begin spinning violently until the aircraft lost control. To prevent this, engineers added a second small rotor at the tail. That side rotor pushed air sideways and kept the aircraft stable. It seemed like a brilliant solution, until the consequences began to appear. The tail rotor produced no vertical lift. It did not help carry cargo. It did not make the helicopter faster. It consumed between 10 and 15% of the engine's total power simply to stop the aircraft from spinning out of control. It was wasted energy, and even worse, it was extremely vulnerable. In combat, that long tail became the weakest point of the entire structure. A single bullet impact, nearby shrapnel explosion, or even a rough landing could destroy the transmission system connecting the main rotor to the rear propeller. When that happened, the result was immediate. The helicopter would begin spinning uncontrollably like a giant top in the sky. Many pilots didn't even have time to react. During the Vietnam War, the data began alarming military strategists. A huge number of crashes and shootdowns were directly linked to damage in the tail or rear rotor system. Some historical estimates suggested that up to 75% of helicopter losses involved failures in that critical area. The very component designed to save the helicopter had become the reason for its destruction. While the West attempted to reinforce the traditional design, Soviet engineers decided to attack the problem at its root. Instead of protecting the tail rotor, they considered eliminating it completely. The idea sounded absurd. Without a rear rotor, the helicopter should simply spin out of control. Modern aviation had been built around that logic. But the Russians found a solution that was as elegant as it was extreme. They placed two main rotors on top of each other, both connected to the same central shaft, and most importantly, spinning in opposite directions. While the upper rotor generated torque in one direction, the lower rotor produced an identical force in the opposite direction. The two forces canceled each other out inside the machine itself. The helicopter no longer needed a tail rotor. The problem disappeared at its source. The coaxial system had been born. The concept itself was not entirely new. Some engineers had experimented with similar ideas since the early 20th century. But the Soviets were the ones who pushed the technology to its limits and transformed it into a real military platform. The Kamov Design Bureau became the heart of this aerial revolution. While other manufacturers continued building long and vulnerable helicopters, Kamov developed compact, aggressive aircraft with an almost alien appearance. From a distance, their machines looked unlike any other helicopter in the world. They lacked the long tail extending behind them. The body was shorter, tougher, and more balanced. But the real difference appeared when they took off. All of the engine's power went directly into the main rotors. Nothing was wasted stabilizing the aircraft. Every drop of fuel worked to lift cargo, increase speed, or improve maneuverability, and the results were astonishing. One of the most impressive examples emerged when comparing two helicopters powered by nearly the same engine output. On one side stood the legendary Mi-8, one of the most widely used conventional helicopters in Soviet history. On the other stood Kamov's Ka-32, equipped with coaxial rotors. Both were robust machines. Both were designed for heavy transport. But there was one difference that left many military engineers stunned. The Mi-8 could lift between 3.5 and 4 tons of payload. The Ka-32 could lift 5 tons. The difference was enormous. With similar engines, the coaxial helicopter achieved an efficiency improvement of nearly 20%. All thanks to one seemingly simple idea: stop wasting power on a tail rotor. In military terms, that meant carrying more soldiers, more fuel, more ammunition, or more equipment without increasing engine size. It was a massive tactical advantage, but the benefits did not stop there. Eliminating the long tail completely transformed the aircraft's dimensions. Coaxial helicopters were between 25 and 30% shorter than equivalent conventional designs. That detail changed their strategic usefulness. On military ships where every meter of space matters, a compact helicopter could operate from much smaller decks. In dense cities or tight forests, maneuvers became safer and more precise. Even landing in improvised zones became easier. While a traditional helicopter constantly had to protect its vulnerable rear tail from striking buildings, trees, or structures, Kamov models could move through extremely confined spaces. It was like comparing a bus to an armored vehicle built for urban warfare. But the real magic appeared during aerial maneuvers. In a conventional helicopter, rapid turning required constant coordination between the main rotor and the tail rotor. There were clear physical limitations. But in the coaxial system, pilots could perform incredibly fast rotations around their own axis simply by altering the balance between both rotors. The helicopter seemed to dance in the air. It could aim in any direction almost instantly. For attack aircraft, that capability was devastating. The best example was the K-50 Black Shark, one of the most intimidating helicopters ever built. Its design looked like something from a science fiction film: a compact fuselage, twin rotors spinning in opposite directions, and brutal maneuverability that allowed it to aim its weapons faster than any other combat helicopter. Many pilots described the experience as flying an armed fighter jet, suspended in the air. And so, what began as a desperate attempt to solve a deadly weakness eventually became one of the most radical ideas in modern aviation. Russian coaxial helicopters proved that sometimes evolution is not about improving a component, but eliminating it entirely. No tail rotor, no wasted power, no dependence on a vulnerable structure that had cost countless lives for decades. But every revolution comes with a price. Because behind that brutal maneuverability and impressive efficiency lies an incredibly complex machine. A system where two gigantic rotors spin only feet apart while computers and precision mechanisms constantly work to prevent catastrophe in midair. One small mistake and everything ends in seconds. That is the paradox of extreme engineering. The more powerful a machine becomes, the more delicate the balance required to keep it alive. And perhaps that is the real lesson behind this story. The most impressive technology is not born from comfort. It is born when someone dares to question what the rest of the world considers untouchable. While millions of people accepted that every helicopter needed a tail, a group of engineers decided to challenge that logic. And because of that, they forever changed the way humanity dominates the sky. Because true innovation is not always about adding more. Sometimes, it is about removing what nobody else dares to touch. If you are passionate about stories of extreme engineering, military technology, and machines that change the world, subscribe and join us for the next documentary. Because there are still incredible secrets hidden behind the most powerful machines ever built.